And he'll speak for 30 minutes, he'll speak for 20. But if you want to engage him with a question, he has to be out here hard stop by 9 o'clock. Let me welcome Astro Teller to the stage.
All right, I'm going to be a little bit provocative just to get us warmed up. You can mic down a little bit, maybe. I'm pretty loud. So, part of the reason that I came here was I feel a kinship with what you guys are doing. The word keiretsu, I think, is an important word, and angel investing is the most magical part of the process, and it's the part of the process that I'm most sensitive to. So what we do at X is very similar to what you would think of as angel investing. We look at a huge number of ideas. We put small bets on all of them. Many of them, most of them, don't work out, and then we double down on the ones that are good ideas. Sound familiar? You guys are a keiretsu because you share your money, or you pool your money, because you talk a lot to each other, and that's really good. But so this isn't going to be an interesting talk if we make it a 25-minute mutual admiration society. So I'm going to push you guys a little bit on some thoughts. So the first is that I'm going to tell you what I tell everyone at X, which is don't be satisfied with where we currently are. That's not interesting. What could you do as a group to be 10 times more effective than you currently are? Pick your favorite metric. Maybe that's an AUM collectively that's 10 times as big. Maybe that's a return that's 10 times as big. But whatever it is, aspire to more. That's what you ask your entrepreneurs to do, right? Don't you tell them to be thinking that big and to be pushing that hard? But who's asked you to make it 10 times better, to make this group 10 times better? So I would suggest that on the breaks and during this thing that you're doing today, make that part of your mission to push yourself. You know what? If you shoot for 10 and you hit 3, it'll still have been worth the effort. You know, my concern is that when you shoot for 10% better, you end up with 2% better. When you shoot for 10x better, sometimes it's only 3 times better. That's still pretty awesome. The other thing that I want to work with you guys on, and give me a 10-minute running start, but then I'm happy to take some questions because I think this is going to get a little frustrating for you. I hope it is. You're a keiretsu, but are your companies really a keiretsu? Because I've seen this so many times where people produce networks, supposedly, for their companies. So they invest in all these companies, and they say to the companies, talk to each other, make good business together. Now it's a keiretsu. First of all, it doesn't really work. I've seen it 100 times. I haven't actually examined how you guys do it, but I'm willing to bet that your CEOs would not primarily say that it's a keiretsu. In the sense that they share a common upside to a meaningful degree, which is the original meaning of that word. But much more importantly, let's come back to Google X for a second. Let me tell you about a piece of our special sauce that I think you guys might be missing, and maybe you can find a way to steal from us. So, we look at all of these ideas just like you do. We place all of these little bets. But we don't just wait and see if they fail. We actively kill most of them. Right out of the gate, there's a disconnect between you and your entrepreneurs. Because what you're thinking you're doing is placing this very large number of very small bets and then doubling down on the ones that work well. But the entrepreneurs, they have one company. They don't actually have the same interests that you do. So they're thinking, well, no, I want me to win. I don't want you guys to win. I don't want the process to win. I want me to win. And because their pressures are so different from your interests, they end up telling you things. Very few of them probably actively lie to you, but they're not trying to help you accomplish the thing you're trying to accomplish. And that's incredibly dangerous when all of your money is going to a bunch of super bright, super ambitious, super well-meaning people whose interests really aren't perfectly aligned with yours. Here's a fantasy world where someone who's just taken $2 or $3 million of your money and built up a small team raises their hand and says, you know what, we were just totally wrong. I think we're gonna have to let go of half this team and kind of start over. You've all probably seen that happen once in a blue moon, but it happens, right? Now imagine someone saying, you know what, I just want to give you the money back. Like, let's just start over. It was a good experiment, but it turns out we ran the experiment. We tried to explore this space. It looked like it was really promising, and for those following interesting reasons, it turns out this is not really going to be one of those amazing return businesses. Just take the rest of your money back, and let's just try a new one. They do not come and tell you that, but that's what you wish they would come and tell you. They're not coming and telling you that because there's no incentive for them to come and tell you that. This is why X works so well. Because it's been called an incubator, and I'm not sure that's the right description, mostly because I mostly haven't seen incubators work before. But now imagine that you really believed, you worked at X, you have this amazing idea, you're an entrepreneur, and we say, sure, here's $1 million, build up a small team. You can act right out of the gate like you're 50 or 100 people because we have this huge set of central services, some of the best failure analysis people in the world, some of the best strategic sourcing people in the world, some of the best battery people in the world, and on and on and on. So your 5 or 10 people can act like a big company, run a set of experiments, and then if you raise your hand and you say, you know what, it's not working, you know because you've seen me do it before, that your project will end, but people are going to clap for you on stage. I've given people bonuses for ending their projects on stage. Then, if you recycle them in an elegant way where they feel like they have an opportunity not to be wasting their time on something they didn't fully believe in, they're actually going to be hungry to do that. Nobody wants to work on a mediocre project, especially entrepreneurs. If you give them real opportunity and incentive, they'll do exactly what you want. So X was basically structured very specifically to solve this problem, to solve the sort of stage 2 booster rocket problem of recycling and honesty between the investors and the entrepreneurs that you guys, for all that you want it solved and all that your entrepreneurs want it solved, haven't actually solved. So that doesn't mean you have to sort of give up, throw in the towel, or start some duplicate X. That's not my point. But I do think that you could apply some thinking to the challenge of how could we perfectly align the interests of our business as a keiretsu of investors and the individual entrepreneurs who are working so hard on their individual businesses. Because those interests, especially in the earliest days when they're most likely to end what they're doing, is the most disconnected. And the magical stuff happens in those early days. The way that we get the returns that we're getting internally is by so effectively discovering for $1 million or $5 million what might otherwise have cost $50 or $100 million to discover. And that basically drives to two things. I've just given you one, which is this sort of incentive structure and making it exciting, not just interesting or palatable, but exciting for people to raise their hand and say, this isn't working, this is not what we should do. The second thing, and this is something you have a better shot at in your current structure, but I bet you still isn't what most of your entrepreneurs are hearing from you, is either the Achilles heel that's in the business for your individual entrepreneurs is there or it's not there. It's not going to go away because we ignore it, right? So let's go look for it. Because the sooner you find the Achilles heel and discover that the business for this entrepreneur is a bad business, even if you're disconnected from them, the happier you'll be with them. Now you have to find incentives for them to do this, but let's pretend for a second you've solved that first problem. Go to them and say, I do this all the time. I ask the entrepreneurs who are running projects inside of X, make a list of the top 10, top 20 things that you think your team needs to do. Then they do it. And then I say, how did you order that list? And I always get the same, or not at X anymore, but if I haven't played the game before with a particular project lead, I say, how did you order that list? And they always say, well, order of importance. We'll do this thing at the top of the list and we'll go down. And I'll say, oh, that's interesting. Just humor me for a minute. It's going to take a day or two. Go back, and you can make a different list, or if you want, just reorder that list. I just want you to order it relative to how much you think you'll learn from each of those things on the list. Don't worry about how important they are. Just tell me how much you think you'll learn from each. They always make the list. The list is always different, usually radically different in ordering. And then I say, just play along. Let's do the top 2 things on the list. They usually do it. It takes some arm twisting because there's all kinds of like, yeah, but you're going to judge me at the end of the year by how much I got done. And for the people who haven't sort of seen this movie before, it takes a little bit of pushing, but eventually they go and they do the top 2 things on the what we're going to learn the most from list. And when they're done with those first 2 things, I say, now make a list of the 10 or 20 most important things to do. And that new list that they make is unrecognizably different than the first list that they had. And then I say, that's why we don't do the important list. Because you don't know it yet, but you're wasting your time. You believe that you know what's important, but you don't know what's important. I'm not smart enough. Larry Page is not smart enough, and your entrepreneurs are not smart enough either. None of us have crystal balls. The only really reliable thing to do is to constantly and repeatedly run experiments, dispassionately. An experiment is only the wrong thing to do if, number 1, you already know the outcome. That's a dumb experiment to run. Or number 2, the answer to the question you're asking, the hypothesis you have in the experiment, won't change what you do next. But if you have neither of those failure modes, just run experiments. Here's another way of thinking about this same thing. Again, I'm trying to help you understand a set of pressures to put on your entrepreneurs, and I promise you, I know for a fact this is not how your board meetings sound. And it doesn't sound possible, but they could. I know because I have the equivalent of board meetings pretty much all day long every day with all of these projects, and that's what they sound like. I say to people once they've accomplished something actually meaningful where they're really glad for the outcome, I say, now that we've done this, takes 3 or 4 years, let's say, what percentage of the time, if you kept all of the people, all of the knowledge in your heads, you just lost all of the stuff you've made, all the code you've written, all the actual hardware, all the tools maybe for manufacturing, you just have to make it again. You know what the right answer is. How long, what percentage of the time it took you to get here would it take for you to make this thing which you now think is great? And people usually give numbers between 10 and 30%. I think that they're actually sandbagging. It's probably usually closer to the 10% than the 30%, but let's call it 20% just for argument's sake. So what's the other 80% of the time that they actually took? That is called learning. That's the hard part of making stuff, particularly of innovation. Your entire project as board members and as investors is not to fix the 20%. Shame on you if you don't hire good engineers who can build stuff in roughly the right amount of time. Anyone can do that. That is not the hard part, and it's not the low-hanging fruit because it's 20% of the time, which means it's roughly 20% of your money. It's the 80% you want to contract. And the 80% you do not contract by hiring smarter people. You do not contract that by telling them to stay later at night and eat more pizza or sleep under their desks. It just doesn't work. You contract that 80% by changing how they explore the space, by how they do the learning, by training them and creating incentives. That's what you have to do. They will not do this. You have to create incentives for them to be ferocious learners, not ferocious builders. How much actual progress are they making? Not how much motion are they making? These people are very eager to please you, the investors. I know, they're very eager to please me. I'm functionally their investor. And it takes constant effort to say, don't create motion. Don't show me something bright and shiny. Tell me why this won't work. I'm a naturally passionate person. It's trivial to get me excited about your project. We can do that in 1 minute. Fine, put it on the side. That's why I'm ranting to you about the stuff you can do better. I'm already passionate about what you do. Let's talk about what's not working. Let's talk about how we can make it better. And once they get into that mode, then you have to reward them for that. You have to celebrate the negative results as much as you celebrate the positive results, or they won't run experiments. This is basically what's wrong with academia, for those of you who look at academia or have spent any time in academia, is you only publish positive results, and it has caused all of academia to be just shy of worthless. Not because they aren't smart people there, but because the incentives are miswired. Because there's no reasonable way for them to make progress by, in a balanced, dispassionate way, just running the right experiments that will be the most meaningful, because most experiments have a null result, and you just can't get published with that. You don't get tenure when you put out null result after null result, or point out over and over again that your colleagues' results are not reproducible. You know, no one's going to give you tenure for that, and your colleagues are going to hate you. But it's the same thing with entrepreneurs. What are you doing to create that sense for them that if they really run experiments, if they're trying to build knowledge, if they're trying to discover the sort of sand traps along the way, rather than build something which will cause you to have kind of surface level increased faith in their business, because that's what they're optimizing for right now. They want the next piece of money from you. And to get the next piece of money from you, they are deluded into believing that the thing that they have to do is build their thing enough and start getting somebody to pay for it. But anyone who's been an entrepreneur knows that if you're clever about it, you can sell $1 for like 95 cents over and over again, and your investors are paying that nickel. And most of your entrepreneurs are kind of doing that a good bit of the time because they don't have the right product, but they want you to feel like they're getting traction. All right, I'm going to rant for another 5 minutes, but I'll take a few questions if you guys have some.
Yeah, while we get ready for questions, so we asked everybody their passion. What's your passion?
My passion is this that I'm talking about. It's systematizing innovation. I believe that the world has an enormous number of serious problems, that we are not going to solve those problems in the time that we need to solve them unless we get better at problem solving as a group. I don't think we're going to steal. I'm not worried you guys will take all the good problems away and there'll be none left for us. Sadly, the world's not wired like that.
Yeah, so let's do 5 questions. You ready?
Sure.
Okay, please, and then we'll move on to Fred. And okay, please.
Astro, this is just wonderful, and there's so much that I won't be able to remember it all, and I can't take notes fast enough. Where have you written some of this down, or how can we really get your whole wisdom?
You know, I'm happy to send something to Randy afterwards, but the simplest thing to do is to go to YouTube, and there are lots of talks there. There is some overlap, of course, between these talks. I've done what I can in the talks that are up on YouTube to make them somewhat different. So there's a talk that's sort of equations of innovation that I did at Singularity University, and another one called Getting Started on a Big Idea, which is really meant for entrepreneurs, but you might find very interesting. I did a talk very specifically about failure, which is related to this issue of running experiments at South by Southwest maybe 8 months ago. There's a number of other ones in various forms. There was an interesting one at Solid maybe 4 or 5 months ago, which was a case study about the stratospheric balloon project that we have at X. So I would recommend just go to YouTube, type Astro Teller, and you should hear some interesting stuff.
They line up perfectly, all things you just said, right to the left. And you see all those. Also, this is being recorded. If you want to see this recording, please see it in a team member. Fred Cohen, wonderful Kretz Forum member last 3 years, hails from Pebble Beach. Fred.
So this seems like, over here, seems like a big money strategy rather than a small money strategy because you have to make lots of bets. That's problem one. Problem two is it's a really nice strategy, and we've tried this for sort of very low-level startup people. That is, people that are very inexpensive, like students and so forth, so you can try again and again and get lots of them. But without big money or inexpensive resources, I don't see a way that you're going to do enough experiments to have a high enough probability of success over all those failures.
But maybe I've misunderstood. How many investments has the Kretz Forum done in the last 5 years? Many hundreds?
We've done over 740 in the last 15 years.
Okay, that seems like actually, we've probably looked at more than 700 ideas, but we have not invested more than $100,000 in 700 things. You guys are lapping us.
I doubt that if you actually look at the numbers, but
Heard it here.
Yeah.
But the challenge remains, right? That is, there are two niches where that approach works, and neither of those niches are dominant at Kritsu. Now, we do have Kritsu Capital, which allows people to diversify their investment across the whole set of companies where Kritsu members have decided to invest. But that's not the same thing. That's not a fast failure approach. That's a diversification of risk approach.
I'm just observing that there's a piece of special sauce which you guys are close to, and as you just observed, you are structurally separated from by a moat. Find a way to make a bridge over that moat to get to the increased special sauce, which I promise you, you're actually structurally, because you're running 700 of these experiments in 15 years, you're kind of close to, and yet you can't get to for some of the reasons you just pointed out. That's structurally not wired that way.
Okay, to the left, this gentleman is our very first Kritz Forum member in our Bangalore chapter. Please introduce yourself and the question.
Yeah, Lakshmi Narayan from Bangalore. You use the word systemizing innovation. So the innovation comes because of the problems. If I'm not wrong, every innovation comes. Is the problems are not time relevant? What problem used to be there, or the innovation becomes a time relevant? Sometime you start working on an innovation. When the time passes on, the innovation becomes meaningless when we cross that time. For example, if the Uber has been 5 years before, it may not be successful. May not be, we don't know what will happen next to 5 years down the line. So how do we, is there a mechanism, or is there a way how you can look at the systemizing the innovation perspective?
So it's certainly true that problems are time dependent. Some problems just get solved. Even if the problem doesn't get solved, it gets recast enough by time and by new contexts such that your solution is no longer the right one. We've killed projects before because the thing that we were building, it turned out other people were doing it almost as well as we were. Or it was becoming a hot space, and because we're interested in solving the problems, we're like, look, the world's going to solve this with or without us, and we think we have like a 1.5x, 2x kind of improvement over what other people are building, not a 10x. Let's just let this one go and spend time on something else. So we actually do that all the time. You have to have the structure in order to feel good about doing that. You have to be able to recycle the people. But much better to let go of something which looks like, oh, it's a 2x return, and then if you hold on to it for a while, you're just kind of lying to yourself, and you're never really going to get the returns that you hope for. It's a sunk cost fallacy, and if you can structurally and emotionally get everybody there, then yeah, if you're wrong, you're wrong. And sometimes the problems that we see aren't even there or aren't correctly framed by the time we get there.
Okay. To our right, Dr. Teller, Matthew DeMurl to my right is general partner of our fund. We've made 25 investments, soon to be 40 this next year. Matthew, your question.
So firstly, it's great to have you here. We're all very privileged that you are here, and hopefully this is not a one-time conversation. Hopefully this is a dialogue that begins today. There are subtleties that your thesis, as Fred pointed out, we would need to talk more about. We don't have the time today. We're not an organization. We're very atomistic. Viewed from any individual investor's perspective, they make a very small number of investments. They fear failure because it means loss of capital enormously, and they'll work very hard to make sure companies don't fail. So there's subtleties in that mix. But hopefully we can find a way of making sure all of the companies we back benefit from all of the resources and capabilities of Google, and we would love this to be a dialogue.
Great, and just to be clear, I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm not at all confident I know what you should do. I'm only telling you that I feel kinship with you in one way, that we're doing a lot of small bets. And I'm telling you that we have a piece of special sauce which I see that you don't have, and that you should find your own way of trying to get at. It's probably structurally going to be different than ours because you are wired in a much sort of looser network than X is. But I think that the opportunity is there. So I am challenging you. Anyone who thinks that I said the answer and you didn't quite understand it has missed the boat. I'm only suggesting that there's an opportunity there that has yet to be harvested.
Okay.
And the other half of that is we think we have secret sauce which we don't think you understand, and we would love the chance to share it with you.
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's
Game
true.
on, Astro.
Yeah.
Game on. Astro, we have talked, and you've heard me so many times, our members throughout the world, sometimes mother's milk is obviously capital, but resources are even more powerful. So we have a lot of gray hair at Kritsu. Let's unleash our I can't speak to this with young kids. They don't know what a Rolodex is, but we unleash our data banks. We unleash our resources. And then we're going to do that today. You're going to hear me all day long. Give to these entrepreneurs. Yes, a lot of risk and opportunity, and obviously what we do, but give of resources. Okay, how much time? You got 3 more?
2 more
2 more.
questions.
Okay, we have a mic there?
Uh,
Yeah, and then...
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah,
Dr.
no-
Teller, you mentioned that Google X has done failure analysis. Could you expand on that?
Sure. I mean, we make a lot of hardware things. So by failure analysis, I mean, we do postmortems. That's not what I was talking about. Just as an aside, our experience with postmortems is it's relatively easy, at least at X, because people are in the habit, to get them to do the postmortem after an interesting end to a sub-project or a full project. It's surprisingly hard, even at X, to get other people to read the postmortems. Because the people who are the most threatened by it, we've gotten them good at making them. But then other teams sometimes have a hard time when they're being pushed to go fast to see how much they can learn by analogy from reading these case studies, these really honest descriptions of what was tried and why it didn't work. Because they're like, look, I'm making a self-driving car, and you're like making balloons. What am I going to learn from the fact that you made a bunch of balloons that didn't work out? They're wrong, and so there's a constant push. But that's actually not what I meant. We have a failure analysis lab. This is like scanning electron microscope kind of stuff. This is when something isn't working physically, when it breaks, how do you figure out why it broke? And this turns out to be a huge problem for us. For example, with the balloons, because they're at 1 or 2% atmospheric pressure, they're at 80 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, when they're up in the stratosphere, and they're getting brittle because of the cold, because of the UV rays that are hitting them at a higher rate than hit them down here, and then they start leaking. It's very hard to recreate that set of problems on the ground because the balloon wouldn't fit in this room. And so how do you create the learning of why they're leaking, for example? We call in the failure analysis crew to do that because that's part of the iteration process of doing design improvements.
Okay,
on
last
physical
question.
things.
Shirley G., Chris for member of the last 5 years and queen of due diligence.
Hi. To your point, we're in a success culture, and every time we have a problem, we go to best practices. Is there a way that Google can actually take on a project to capture all the failures in the world and have that available in a clearinghouse? I mean, I can personally donate 1,000 failures to your project, and I bet everyone in this room could too.
I love that idea. I
Yeah.
love that idea.
Yeah.
I think we are going to have the same problem I was just pointing out about the postmortem. Essentially what you're describing is like postmortems for the world so that we can all learn from them. And it's a gorgeous idea. I'm actually going to go home and start implementing that. So, yeah. All right, send me an email afterwards. Randy has my contact information. But here's what I would suggest for people who are looking to share positive and negative stories about audacious things they're trying to do. One of the things that I did right when we started X was to start an event and a website called solve4x.com. The event is called Solve for X. This has nothing to do with our stuff. This is about celebrating other people's aspirational moonshots, audacious things they're trying to do. And so for any entrepreneur in the room, if you think you have something which could be posed as a moonshot, and not all businesses can be, but if you think you do, put it there. What we don't have at Solve4X is a good way for people to list their failures. You're totally right, and I will get on that. Thank you very much for having me, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. And so hopefully we'll see you summer.